Growing healthy plants starts with growing healthy soil, and believe it or not, I am going to show you how you can use just 5 homemade inputs to restore your soil from whatever state it's currently in. Specifically, I should say if it's in a bad state. I've designed this roadmap so that if you are just getting into gardening, maybe you're coming off of a season and you realize you've got a lot to learn, you can do this with things that you hopefully have on hand or close by, and with little time and effort, we're going to start by just going over how to make these inputs, and then we'll go over how to use them and why they're going to help you transform your soil. The inputs that I'm going to teach you to make are this homemade liquid plant fertilizer, this fish fertilizer, and a mineral supplement. And those are the liquid inputs. And then I'm going to show you how to make a high quality compost, homemade, and a simple but powerful microbial inoculant. But first, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, I am Taylor. I teach gardeners how to grow in more sustainable and regenerative ways using the best of the best techniques that I can find. And if you want to get weekly gardening insights straight into your email inbox, you can sign up for my email newsletter, linked in the description, or scan the code on the screen and you can get signed up. So let's hop into the fertilizers. And if you've been with us for a while on this channel, you know that I don't really think that we actually need to use traditional fertilizers in most cases, but I'm going to change the definition of a fertilizer here for the sake of shared language. Biomimicking liquid solutions doesn't really have quite the same ring to it. So homemade fertilizers. The first one is an easy one that you can make in as little as 1 week in warm weather, or if you're brave enough to brew it indoors, it's the JADAM liquid fertilizer, otherwise known as JLF. And I was first introduced to this when I read the incredible book by Young-Sung Cho, JADAM Organic Farming. This fertilizer is made by decomposing plant debris in water using the microbes found in leaf mold soil. And in case that sounds complicated, trust me, it's not. If you'd like, you can check out our full mini course on all the ways that you can make plant customized fertilizers. You can check that out right here on YouTube. But to get started, you really just need to gather some soil found beneath the leaf litter in an undisturbed forest, toss some plant debris in a bucket, add the leaf mold soil, and fill it up with water so that it just covers the plant debris. And this is going to ferment all on its own. You can stir it once in a while to keep it all decomposing evenly. Mold is going to grow on the surface, which is totally fine. When we make JADAM liquid fertilizer, JLF, we're getting the leaf mold microbes to putrefy the plant debris. And then when we strain that out, to use it, we're collecting some nutrients and biology that is cooperated to make a sort of fertilizer. So this fertilizer is unlike a synthetic or even an organic fertilizer because it's supplying the soil with a wombo combo of nutrients and microbes. And when that happens, the microbes that get into the soil are the ones that know how to process those nutrients in the future, meaning they can cycle nutrients in the organic matter in the soil and the minerals. Super easy to make and doesn't take long at all. Just don't spray or water it onto plants that are in the ground without diluting it a lot in dechlorinated water. The point is less to saturate the soil and the plants with nutrients and more to give them a microbial infusion. The second fertilizer that I want to show you how to make is a long-term ferment. It takes between 3 months to a year to fully finish, and that's because instead of decomposing plant debris, we're decomposing fish. And fish fertilizer is a super commonly used way to feed plants. Fish hydrolysate is something that you can buy from the store, and depending on how it's made, it can be a decent option. The problem is that most fish hydrolysate is a little expensive, and you really want to pay attention to the way that it's been processed. You kind of got to look for the stuff that has been cold processed and hasn't had any chemical treatment. Some companies will use chemicals to heat up and speed up the process of decomposition, but it results in a pretty poor quality product. And sometimes these can spoil if you don't stabilize it right. And this is one of the reasons that I like to make my own fish fertilizer. It comes from the Korean natural farming technique of fermenting fish very slowly. And if you've never fermented anything before, you don't need to worry about it being too complicated. Literally, it takes 2 ingredients, fish waste and granulated sugar. You can check with your butcher or use leftover fish scraps from whole fish that you buy. Really, whatever you can get your hands on will work, especially the skin, bones, and guts. And all you do is cut up the fish pieces, weigh them, and mix them with an equal weight of high quality sugar. The sugar needs to be granulated because what's going to happen is that it's going to extract moisture from the fish and the naturally occurring microbes present on the fish and in the sugar, and they're going to start fermenting it. And once you start this process, it's pretty hands-off. You basically just want to make sure that your fish is properly coated in sugar, pressed down into your fermentation vessel, and then submerged in its own liquid. And then you can seal it up so that critters don't get in there. If you do seal it, you're gonna wanna open it and close it every day for the first month or so, and then maybe once a month past that, because the pressure, as you just heard, is going to build up a little bit. This is called burping your jar. Don't fill up your container all the way to the brim. Leave some headspace and the fish will very gradually dissolve into a wide spectrum of free amino acids and other nutrients. Once this is ready, similar to the JADAM liquid fertilizer, we're not going to spray this on our plants undiluted or even really on the soil undiluted. We mostly want to treat this as a signal for our plants and the soil microbes that can feed the plants with these nutrients and unlock more of them in the soil. Now there's a third fertilizer that I'll conclude with that is sort of going to round out the nutritional spectrum, and this is great to make any time of year. It really only takes a few weeks to brew with only a few minutes of on-hand prep. And this fertilizer can be made by combining eggshells and animal bones and soaking them in a high quality vinegar, or you can soak them separately, which is what I do. There's some slight variation when it comes to these ingredients. Animal bones are going to contain a good amount of calcium phosphate, whereas eggshells or oyster shells are going to contain calcium acetate. The main difference here only really matters if you're trying to follow nutritive cycle theory of applying plant-specific nutrients at specific times of development. If you're just trying to get some high-quality mineral extracts from your bones and shells, feel free to combine these. Cook and crush up your materials, weigh them out, and then add 10 times their weight in vinegar. The vinegar is going to extract the minerals over the course of a few weeks, and then you can strain them off and you've got water-soluble minerals. Once again, we're not going to be applying these to the soil or plants undiluted. The purpose, as with all of our homemade liquid gardening inputs, is just to give our plants and the soil biology a nudge in the right direction. So we're applying these at tincture level amounts, 1 to 500 or more in filtered water will achieve the effect that we're going for. These mineral supplements are a great way to combat blossom end rot in your vining plants and to supply fruit bushes and trees with the necessary calcium to provide good structure for their fruit. And there you go. 3 super simple homemade liquid fertilizers that you can make with stuff that you've either got on hand or within arm's reach of the butcher shop or supermarket. With these fertilizers, you're more or less going to catch the ins and outs of your nutritional needs. They sort of round each other out a little bit. Now, so far when it comes to the solutions to our soil ailments, we've just talked about the liquid fertilizers that we can make and use to apply in small amounts of nutrients and microbes. And these are great for natural soil restoration in terms of nutrient availability for plants, but they are not really going to do much in the way of addressing soil structure and material composition. So for the next natural homemade input that's going to help restore our soil, I want to talk about compost. And the reason for this is because this is something that, with a little bit of intentionality and effort, is well within reach of most home gardeners and costs very little to make yourself, especially when it compares to buying it. Not only that, but it's my firm belief that almost any compost that you make at home, unless you accidentally contaminate your pile with something strange, is going to be a higher quality compost than you're likely able to find readily available to you. So let's take a look at this very simple formula for hot compost making. This is going to play a multifaceted role in restoring your soil. So if you make one thing for your garden, I would say that this should be it. For my compost pile ingredients, I'm using some freshly raked autumn leaves, some leftover yarrow that hasn't turned black and nasty yet, still bright green. I've got some nasty sludgy weed liquid fertilizer, about 1.5 buckets of bokashi fermented food scraps that have fully fermented, and then I've got some straw, wood shavings, and chicken poo. Now this chicken bedding, the straw, wood shavings, and manure is enough to make a compost all on its own, because by this point the chickens have properly saturated the carbon-rich straw and wood shavings with their nitrogen-rich manure. Chicken manure is really high in nitrogen because the turd bombs are actually a combination of urine and poop. So all that needs to happen is to increase the moisture content and then pile it up. And that would heat up all on its own. Because I've got these other ingredients though, we're gonna add them to the pile. And the only thing that we gotta keep in mind is that when you add some nitrogen-rich material, you gotta balance it out with carbon-rich material. And if you're just hearing these terms and you're confused, it's really not that complicated. Carbons are sometimes called browns and nitrogens are called greens. And this is slightly misleading, but it'll kind of get us some of the way there. Our straw, wood shavings, dried leaves are brown materials, carbon rich. The yarrow clippings are green. You can use lawn clippings or any other green foliage from your plants. The reason that browns and greens language is misleading is because carbons will always be brown, more or less, but nitrogens aren't exclusively green. So animal manure, coffee grounds, fruit peels, bokashi food scraps, these are not green, but they contain a lot of nitrogen. And if you're only getting more confused, as I explain this, you can download our compost pile checklist that contains easy to understand visuals and even gives you the chance to track your pile a bit. You can download that if you would like the extra visual aid for reference. Ordinarily, I would build this compost pile in a compost bay or wrap it in some fencing, but I'm making this at my in-laws' house and I don't have either of those. So I'm making a freestanding pile. For this pile, I just want to show you how simple and easy this can be to make. You want your materials to get properly mixed up so that you don't have any huge clumps of carbon and nitrogen that aren't mixed. And the main way that I accomplish that is by layering my carbons and nitrogens. So, put down some leaves and yarrow on top of that, and then add some straw and some food scraps on top. But for this pile, the straw and chicken manure are already very mixed up together. So I just spread out that pile that came out of my chicken coop, and I spread out my other ingredients as evenly as I could over the top. Then once I added them all to the chicken bedding, I just sort of went around the sides of the pile and lifted up the edges, trying to get in deeper into the pile as much as I can. And I'm really just trying to let the pitchfork mix these materials for me. Pitchforks are great for this because straw and leaves and yarrow and all of that just kind of sifts and mixes itself as it falls through the tines. So once I had piled that up nice and tall, I gave it a good rake around the edges, and we're looking at a pretty decent 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot pile. And those are the general dimensions that you're shooting for to get the pile to heat up and retain heat. Then I covered it on up with a tarp to keep the rain from oversaturating the pile. And then all I had to do was find the obligatory hole that exists in every tarp, and that's where my compost thermometer probe goes. If you don't have a compost thermometer, no sweat. We will put a link to one that we use in the description, but if you don't want to get one yet, you can totally just use your hand to assess if your pile is heating up. If you stick your hand in the pile and it isn't burning the flesh off of your bones, it's not hot enough. And you either want to wait a little bit longer or give it a flip, which just means that we're basically going to do the same thing that we just did, rake out the pile thin and then repile it, trying to further mix up the ingredient. And this is going to give you the chance to assess the moisture content. And if you need to add more water, it'll also aerate the pile a bit in case the materials were too damp or compressed. And if you generally got a right balance of carbon and nitrogens in your pile, it should heat up, and those materials will be well on their way to becoming soil. One other thing that you can add to the pile if you've got it is compost from a previous batch. I always add a little bit of mature homemade compost as a way to kickstart the microbial activity in the pile, but it's not necessary unless you've got it. You can think of it sort of as a mother culture, like your sourdough starter or kombucha SCOBY or raw vinegar culture. And then another thing that I'm adding here actually is charcoal. Charcoal is a great thing to add to any compost pile. It soaks up nutrients and microbes and acts as a sort of permanent compost that never dies. There's lots of reasons it's amazing, but if you don't have it, don't sweat it. And I should also say, if you're a beginner and you don't know what bokashi is, don't sweat that one either. Bokashi, fermented food scraps, is food waste that has been preserved and almost pickled so that it becomes more ready to decompose in compost. You don't need it to make a compost pile. I'm just using it as one of my sources of nitrogen in this case. And I just want to point out, especially if you have never done this before, it can maybe feel a little intimidating or like a lot of work. But once you have your materials assembled, this really doesn't take that long to make. I spent 10 minutes mixing up the ingredients and piling them to get this heap made. It'll probably take me another 10 minutes each time that I go to flip the pile. This is a nice, easy workout. You're breathing fresh air, making something with your hands and from stuff that you've already got, hopefully. And if you don't have chicken manure and you need some, look on Facebook Marketplace. Also, just drive out of the country a little bit and see if anyone has got horses or goats, because they are more than likely, they'll let you fill up a few buckets or bags of manure. I've done this so many times from many different people, and people have always been more than happy to share. They might deliver some to your house if they're desperate to unload. Always make sure that you ask the awkward question of, has this animal eaten any feed or grass that has been sprayed with herbicides? Because some of those pass through the digestive tract, and if you don't check, you could potentially be contaminating your compost and therefore your garden, so always ask. Now, if this whole compost process, gathering materials and piling them up, watering them down, flipping it to keep it aerated, still feels like a bit much, there are other options that could work as well, such as a compost tumbler like this. especially if you're trying to make just a little bit of compost, a top dress, a raised bed or two. This can do the trick pretty well. It's obviously just not really going to get you much compost. If you do use this, you want to make sure that you add the same general combination of carbon-rich materials to nitrogen-rich materials to keep the compost microbially balanced. But if compost feels like something that you can wrap your head around, or maybe it's even last year's news, I want to show you one last thing that you can make that is going to take your soil restoration to the next level. And luckily, if you have made the first liquid fertilizer that we talked about, you're already halfway there, sort of. What I want to show you is how to make a powerful microbial inoculant. And yes, everything that we've made so far to some degree is going to inoculate the soil. But this particular recipe is something that will do some serious work on your garden. And the best part, you can make this any time of year. What you're gonna do is use the leaf mold soil, same stuff that you collected for making JADAM liquid fertilizer. Then you're gonna brew up a batch of JADAM microbial solution. If you've never made anything like this, trust me, it is very doable. So start by boiling a large potato or a few small ones until you can mash them up. If you have a blender, you can use that to make a slurry. And then also add some sea salt to that as well. Make sure that it's a high quality sea salt. You don't wanna be using iodized salt. Just add a big pinch of nice unrefined sea salt. Fill up a 5-gallon bucket of water. As always, use a filter or let it off gas. And then you can add your potato and the sea salt. And you can also use cooked brown rice in place of potato. You can add other cooked grains. They just need to be blended into a slurry. And then stir that up into the water. Then take your leaf mold soil and add that to the bucket and stir it up real good. And depending on temps outdoors, you're gonna wanna let this sit either outside covered up or inside. Uncovered is fine. If it's dropping below 45, 50 degrees Fahrenheit at night, just keep your brew inside and look for foaming on the surface of the water. When you see those bubbles, that's a sign that the microbes from the leaf mold soil are feeding on the starch in the potato, and they're gonna feed on the potato starch until they expend their resource and they'll start to die off. So the goal is to catch them before they do that. At this point, when you see the microbial solution foaming and forming a disc at the surface, you can do one of two things. First, you can just pour this directly on your soil, and it'll saturate it with beneficial microbes. But the second thing, and this is what I want you to try out, is you can make a shelf-stable version of this brew that is even more biologically diverse, and it only takes a couple of ingredients, really, dried leaves and bran. And by bran, I mean wheat bran or rice bran or oat bran or whatever bran you can find, that'll work. And you can also use other carbon-rich materials than leaves if you don't have them. I like to use wood shavings and leaves mixed together. You could use wood chips, unsprayed straw, whatever carbon-rich material you can get your hands on will work. Start by mixing these two ingredients together roughly in equal parts and form a pile on the ground. Then take your microbial solution while it's at peak foam and hydrate your pile materials. Same thing as when we made our compost pile. We don't want to get this sopping wet, just damp and fully saturated so that it's just barely dripping with water when we squeeze the materials tight. What's going to happen is that the microbes that we're feeding on the starch in the potatoes or the cooked grains are going to turn their attention to the bran and start feeding on that, which will make them diversify a bit further. This pile is going to heat up just like our compost, but unlike the compost, we want to try to keep the temperatures of the pile below 120 degrees. And that temp range between 110 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit or 43 to 49 Celsius is going to provide the environment for a specific set of beneficial microorganisms to emerge and strengthen and multiply. This stuff is a little particular. It'll heat up all of a sudden, and you really want to try to keep it from overheating if at all possible. If it does start to creep up past 120, just spread it out thin and let it cool off before repiling. Over time, this pile is going to heat up and cool down all on its own as the microbes feed on the carbohydrates in the pile, and they're going to fully colonize the media. Once it's cooled down, you can either spread this out on your soil very thinly and then mulch over the top of it, or you can take it one step further and mix it with equal parts native soil from your garden and do the same process one more time. And this is going to allow those microbes to diversify even further and integrate themselves with microbes already present in your garden soil. Now, if you're familiar with indigenous microorganism cultivation from Korean natural farming, you will recognize this process as IMO stages 3 and 4. This approach isn't going to result in quite the same biological strength as IMO, but it can be done year-round, which is what makes it an amazing way to get started with indigenous microbes. If you haven't heard about any of this stuff before, don't sweat it. Let's get into why we're making these things and how we can use them to restore our soil. But before we get into that, it is time for a word from this video's sponsor, the Natural Gardening Group. If you are embarking on the wonderful world of gardening or even small-scale farming or homesteading and you want to get off on the right foot with the right tools, the Natural Gardening Group is the community for you. When I started trying to do stuff like this to restore my soil from homemade garden amendments and leaf mold soil, I had no one in sight who was doing anything like it to offer support, counsel, encouragement, or camaraderie, which is why that's exactly what I want to offer you through this group. Lots of people casually garden, but if you fall into the category of obsessed, having a supportive community of like-minded growers who are cheering you on in your journey is a must-have. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, scan the code on the screen or hit the link in the description to sign up for a free trial. I look forward to connecting with you personally, and now back to the video. I said at the beginning that growing healthy plants starts with growing healthy soil. So what is healthy soil? Well, it comes down to three main components: the physical composition, the nutritional composition, and the biological composition. So for the physical part, we're talking about structure and material makeup. Is the soil tilthy enough for plants so that they can actually send their roots down deep? Is it properly aerated? Does it have pockets and gaps where plant roots can squeeze their way through? Or is it dense and compacted? For the materials in the soil, we're asking how much sand, silt, clay, and organic matter is there in the soil. And each of these components are found in most soils. It's more a matter of percentages that need to be either slightly amended or balanced. The ideal ratio for what is considered healthy soil is 40% sand, 40% silt, and 20% clay. And within that, an estimated 5 to 10% could be given to organic matter. Now, as riveting as this information is, I tend to find myself spacing out when people start trying to pull fancy math on me. So let's make this a little bit more concrete. Physically, healthy soil is going to manage water and allow plants entry most effectively when it's got a good balance of sand, silt, and clay. But just because a plant is able to send its roots down, it doesn't mean that it's going to find anything. And that's where the nutritional composition comes into play. And this is actually a pretty misleading concept for most home gardeners, because there's good news and there's bad news on this. The good news is that most likely your soil contains all of the essential nutrients that your plants need to be able to grow already without you doing much of anything. And this is great news until you hear the bad news. And to illustrate this, I'll throw you a scenario and see if you can come up with a solution before I get to the answer. Let's say you need money to pay your bills or something, and you're in luck because you happen to have a bank account with $1 billion in it. There's just a few roadblocks. One is that there are no ATMs and you don't have a debit card, so you have to go in person to the bank to collect your money. And this bank only employs one teller. So you have to go up to the counter, ask for your desired amount of funds, and they go into the vault to retrieve it for you. But plot twist, they are only able to pick up $1 bill at a time and hand deliver it to you before they can go back and get you another one. All of the money is there. It's just that the mode of delivery is not feasible for your survival. And so in this crazy scenario, is the solution to the problem to get more money in your bank account? Obviously not, because you have virtually no access to it. The solution is more like get the bank to hire more tellers, or change the policy on how much money they can carry at one time. This is a little bit like what is happening with most of the soil that you might be trying to grow in. A lot of companies will tell you that the reason that your plants aren't growing well is because your soil is deficient in certain minerals. And soil tests can be deceptive here because they may show that you have good amounts of minerals or low amounts of minerals. What most of them won't tell you is that your soil bank isn't employing enough tellers, which is where the biological composition of the soil comes into play. Soil microbes are the bank tellers in this particular metaphor, and your plants would be you trying to get money if you missed that. Now, a lot of home gardening companies would have you believing that back when plants first started popping out of the ground, human beings were there dumping polymer-coated urea to fertilize them. Obviously a ridiculous notion, but it kind of begs the question, how did plants grow all on their own originally? And obviously, if you're a regular visitor of this channel, you know that they didn't and don't grow on their own. They have a bunch of generous buddies helping them out. Fungi and bacteria mostly, not to mention the occasional protozoan and nematode. So here's the thing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't care about our soil nutrient composition at all, but if we put as much care into managing the biological quality of the soil as we put into addressing nutrient deficiencies, I actually think that a lot of these problems would sort themselves out without needing to supply specific doses of trace minerals and micronutrients. But before I repeat myself anymore, let's just briefly talk through some ways that you can test all on your own for these components. For the physical quality, there's a few things that you can do. If you want to test for compaction, you can take a spade or a piece of rebar and press it into the ground somewhere that you know that there is heavy compaction. This is somewhere like vehicles have driven or lots of foot traffic has occurred, and just sort of get a feel for how it responds to the pressure that you're putting into it. You can put a little body weight into it and just see how deep your spade or rebar goes. Then go to a space that you're hoping to convert into a growing space, or maybe are currently trying to grow in, and do the same thing. You can sort of get a rough comparison between the two soils. And if you're hitting a wall in the ground at any point, you're going to have to do something about that before planting. If your spade sinks down pretty easily, then you're probably good to plant there. If you're interested in checking the material composition of your soil in this area, you can scoop up some soil and pop it into a glass jar, and then fill up that jar with water and add a few drops of soap. Shake it real good so that all the clumps break up, and then let that sit for a day or so. And what you'll find is that the sand, silt, clay, and organic matter accumulate in layers in that order, bottom to top. And then you can sort of eyeball the percentages that you see. So for super sandy soil, your issue is going to be that water drains maybe too quickly. And for super clayey soil, you're going to have water pooling issues. Don't worry if your soil leans one way or the other, because loam is hard to stumble upon, but it might be easier than you think to actually create. And we're going to get how to do that in a moment. For testing the nutritional composition of your soil, it's unlikely that you have the equipment to be able to do this at home. You can purchase a capsule-based soil test kit, and you can get a sense of the general macronutrient makeup of your soil, so the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But as I've already alluded to, I don't think that nutritional imbalances are most gardeners' problems. Not saying that this applies to everyone. I'm also not saying that you should just assume that your soil has all the nutrients that your plants need. What I'll reiterate is that it's my belief that if the biological deficiencies were addressed, there's a good chance that the locked up nutrients would become available to your plants. And if you're skeptical about this, you can check out our Soil Biology 101 video that goes pretty deep into the intricate way that soil microbes interact with and support plants. But the gist of it is that the microbes in your soil are going to chelate minerals and make them water soluble for plant roots. They're going to exchange minerals with plant roots and almost hand deliver what those plants need. So this is going to bring us to assessing the microbial quality of your soil. But again, without sending in samples to a lab, it might be a little bit tricky for most home gardeners to officially diagnose biological deficiencies. Even with a microscope, if you happen to have one, you still need to know how to use it properly and know what you're looking for. So instead, there are a few visible signs that you can look for, and these are not going to cover all your bases, but it will get you started in getting a sense. When you scoop up soil from your garden, you want to look for a few things. First of all, are there any earthworms or arthropods in there? Insects and creepy crawlies are actually a good sign of healthy soil biology, because it indicates that there is organic matter present that is providing a food source for the worms and the other microfauna. And that organic matter is also food for bacteria and fungi in the soil. Bacteria and fungi, by the way, are also food for earthworms. So if your soil is teeming with worms, you're probably in good shape. Another sign visible to the naked eye is white strands and clumps within the soil. And these could be a variety of microbes, but the most likely thing that you're looking at are your mycorrhizal fungi and your actinobacteria. Both of these reveal themselves through thin white strands that form aggregates or clumps of soil. And so if you're seeing any of that in or on your soil or underneath the mulch on your soil, you've at least got some good biology present. If you see none of that, no worms, no spiders, centipedes, insects, white strands, you might be in trouble. But fret not if that is the case, because with our 5 homemade inputs, we have the ability to address not only the potential biological deficiencies in your soil, but even the physical composition. As I've already mentioned, the fertilizers that we made aren't exactly meant to deliver huge amounts of nutrients to the soil. The goal here is actually more to nudge the microbes and the plant hormones in the right direction. Each of these fertilizers are things that you can spray over your soil directly in anticipation of getting plants in the ground, but they're also great for foliar applications during the growing season. The main reason that we want to start these as soon as possible is because they take time to make and they're nice to have on hand when you need them. That said, I recommend applying the JADAM liquid fertilizer gradually all through the off season if you're able, because as you do so, you're training and adapting the microbial populations at work down there. Apply it right before rain and let the rain carry the nutrients and the microbes down into the soil where plant roots can access them once you're ready to plant in the spring. Now, I said that if you were to make only one of these inputs, I would recommend that you make compost. And the reason for that is because it's the most versatile. Compost contains a healthy amount of organic matter and microbes. And when you top dress your garden beds with compost, it just seems to find its way into the soil all on its own, likely with a good deal of help from the worms and arthropods it's going to attract once it's there. You really want to get this stuff on your soil as quickly as possible because it's going to break down further, it's going to feed soil biology and turn into soil by the time that you're ready to plant into it. And simply by top dressing your established garden beds with compost, you can improve all three components of your soil. If you're able to make enough, you can even start brand new garden beds pretty much anywhere simply by layering cardboard on the ground and then piling compost 6 inches high on top. Again, you want to do this in the late fall or winter if possible, because all the rain and snow and freezing thawing processes, this stuff is going to decompose and turn into soil more quickly. Finished compost is something that you can plant directly into so long as it's piled high enough. And it really takes a good amount of compost to do this with. And I've estimated that a compost pile about this size, around a cubic yard of unfinished compost, is going to shrink down by about 50%, leaving you with approximately 13.5 cubic feet of finished compost. If you spread that out 6 inches thick, that means that you can cover around 27 square feet of brand new growing space, which is a decent sized garden bed. If you were using this to top dress an established garden bed and you spread that 2 inches thick over the top, obviously it's going to go a bit further, around 81 square feet. Now, if you feel brave and you want to try out the shelf-stable microbial solution, you're basically supplying the soil with an infusion of a really, really strong microbial activity. These microbes, in my experience, do some crazy work. We've long used it and seen it decompact soil. The microbes help break up compaction. They attract more earthworms. They break down minerals and organic matter into plant available nutrients. And as I mentioned before, the compost and the liquid inputs are going to supply microbes, but the microbial solution and the media that's being inoculated results in a much more robust and useful set of diverse microorganisms. With compost, the goal is primarily to use the thermophilic bacteria to speed up decomposition of the materials. So thermophilic means heat-loving, and so the bacteria in the compost is going to generate a lot of heat, and this is by design. When you get your materials up to these high temperatures of between 130 and 160 Fahrenheit, you're killing off the weed seeds in the materials. You're killing the potential pathogens in the materials. If you're composting diseased crop residue or fresh animal manure, you can kill off the bad guys and result in a usable compost. But you're also going to limit the potential for biodiversity. Keeping the JADAM microbial solution bran below 120 is going to help the robust bacteria and fungi to establish. And those microbes that are being borrowed from the natural forest environment are going to crush it in your garden. We call these mesophilic bacteria and fungi. Now, if you want to, you can be really obnoxious to other gardeners and use words like thermophilic and mesophilic microorganisms. Great way to make friends. Anyway, these are mesophilic microbes. They're really going to help unlock those precious nutrients that are likely already present in your soil to a certain extent. And if you can get this stuff on your soil a few months in advance of planting, you're giving that biology the chance to get more and more established. This is going to prepare the environment for when you do go to plant your seeds and starts in the spring. It really helps defend against transplant shock. We dump microbial solution on our soil every year in large amounts leading up to planting, and we apply it all throughout the growing season. But this shelf-stable version is a wonderful thing to have on hand. You can also incorporate this into your potting mix by incorporating a few handfuls in your homemade or store-bought blend. The thing to keep in mind with it is that it's moisture activated once it's dried out. So you don't want to let it get wet until you put it on your soil or you use it in your potting mix or your raised beds. Okay, this video has gone on a bit. My goal here was to give those of you who are just starting out or maybe turning toward natural growing techniques a few steps that you can take at any time of the year, but especially if you're coming off of the growing season and are now waiting for the next one. All of these inputs are nice to get started early because they can take a little while to finish. That said, hopefully you found these doable and hopefully you know how to use them once you make them. Let me know in the comments which of these you're gonna try. And if you have any questions, drop those as well. If you are interested in diving substantially deeper into soil amendment, you will want to check out this video next Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.